second here, and this is going to be recorded. This is going to be put on the Layman channel. But just as a quick recap, we started with Winston kind of having this reflection on truth and history. Winston writes in his secret diary about how the party constantly rewrites the past, and he knows the immediate political reason, right? Which is to make the party always appear right. But he feels that the deeper motive is to erase the very concept of objective truth altogether. So Orwell's warning here is that when everything is politicized, you might end up having the truth spoon-fed to you by the party. And boy, do we see parallels today. So I have friends who all they do is, call me to vent whenever they get finished watching the news. Like some of them are like very close, like my family. But next we remember Winston's idea that if there is hope, it lies in the proles. Since they make up most of the population and still live within human instincts like primitive forms of love and loyalty, the problem is that sheep always outnumber the shepherds. Strength is about mindset, not just about having raw numbers. And then finally, we have Winston encountering kind of the fragility of his own sanity. Remember, he begins to kind of doubt his own grasp on reality, asking how one can truly know that 2 + 2 = 4 when the party insists otherwise. This is actually scarier than it seemed at first, because 2 + 2 = 4, that feels right when we think about it, but Orwell is challenging us to consider that one of the reasons it feels so right is because there's a communal and cultural agreement that it's right. And so the chapter closes with a chilling sense that truth and sanity themselves are kind of under siege in that society. So our last reading ended with the beginning of chapter 8, when Winston, during his walk through the proles community, caught a whiff of real coffee. You remember that? Not the fake victory coffee that the party members were accustomed to. It stops Winston in his tracks. And this was one of the deepest insights that this book has had to offer so far. In a world where everything is politicized, authenticity itself is enough to stop people dead in their tracks, right? And so we talked about the significance of own life. How when everything is politicized, all of your non-political behaviors are scrutinized, like not showing up for the scheduled hate groups and all of the workouts, right? And that's kind of where we ended, that just being someone who is not robotically in step with what the party wants you to do becomes suspicious, right? And so we'll start from there, that concept of own life. It was called, meaning individualism and eccentricity. But this evening, as he came out of the ministry, the balminess of the April air had tempted him. The sky was a warmer blue than he had seen in that year, and suddenly the long, noisy evening at the center, the boring, exhausting games, the lectures, the creaking camaraderie oiled by gin, had seemed intolerable. And we mentioned that before, that when you really taste the truth, you cannot really go back, right? I remember we talked about that too. That was kind of the final insight. On impulse, he had turned away from the bus stop and wandered off into the labyrinth of London, first south, then east, then north again, losing himself along unknown streets and hardly bothering in which direction he was going. If there is hope, he had written in the diary, it lies in the proles. The words kept coming back to him. Statement of a mystical truth and a palpable absurdity. He was somewhere in the vague brown-colored slums to the north and east of what had once been St. Pancras Station. He was walking up a cobbled street of little 2-story houses with battered doorways which gave straight on the pavement and which were somehow curiously suggestive of rat holes. There were puddles of filthy water here and there among the cobbles. In and out of the dark doorways and down narrow alleyways that branched off on either side. People swarmed in astonishing numbers, girls in full bloom with crudely lipsticked mouths, and youths who chased the girls, and swollen, waddling women who showed you what the girls would be like in 10 years' time, and old, bent creatures shuffling along on splayed feet, and ragged, barefoot children who played in the puddles, and then scattered at angry yells from their mothers. Perhaps a quarter of the windows in the street were broken and boarded up. What's interesting is, even though what Winston sees is messy and disorganized, at least it's alive, right? And this is kind of the very thing that the party is afraid of, the messy nature of real life. People are flirting and fighting and competing and laughing and drinking. It would drain the party's resources to attempt to establish complete dominance over all of that. So they just let it thrive as long as it remains disorganized. So the insight to me when I read that was that sometimes we judge people who are truly living because of how disorganized they seem. And we look at our own organized, ritualized lives or politicized lives, and we kind of pretend that we're truly living, you know? Like I remember, living in the Kokomo's in South Colorado Springs. There's these little apartments, and they're still there. I visit every now and then when I go back to Colorado to be on the Black Pegasus channel. And I remember really living, right? We were poor. Sometimes the lights would go out. Sometimes mom couldn't afford to pay that. We were on, we got free breakfast at school as long as we showed up super, super early, like when the stars were still out. So it was disorganized and messy, but we really lived, And so, I just thought that was really interesting. Most of the people paid no attention to Winston, and a few eyed him with a sort of guarded curiosity. Two monstrous women with brick red forearms folded across their aprons were talking outside a doorway. Winston caught scraps of conversation as he approached. It's interesting because we're kind of shown Winston kind of eavesdropping on his own savior, right? He assumes that if there's any hope of stopping Big Brother's obliteration of objective truth, it lies with the proles. And so he decides to eavesdrop on the proles and see whether this revolution he hopes for is impending soon. Maybe the insight there is you should eavesdrop on your own saviors and help them if you can, right? If you think philosophy will save us, then it's your job to check on the state of philosophy and join the conversation. If you think that hope lies with the conservatives and or the liberals, that's okay. But before you assign them that savior title, assess whether their behavior makes them worthy of it, right? Another thing, the discussion that the two women are having, right? Let's go into that. So brick red forearms folded across their aprons were talking outside a doorway. Winston caught scraps of conversation as he approached. Yes, I says to her, that's all very well, I says. But if you'd been in my place, you'd have done the same as what I done. It's easy to criticize, I says, but you ain't got the same problems as what I got. Ah, says the other, that's just it. That's just where it is. So it's justification, right? The discussion the two women are having is one of justification. I'm justified in what I did because of the circumstances I was in, right? It feels like whatever that woman did wasn't right, but she's justifying it to her friend and saying, hey, I did what I had to do, right? We should just orient ourselves toward a way of being that sees us as owing the little we have to others. And the reason that hit me as an insight is because I'm a Christian. Feel free to throw that insight out if it doesn't work for you, because I think it is a principally Christian ethic. However, take what little you have and use it for the good. Avoid those circles that have the mindset of, well, I had so little that it justifies my taking advantage of people. Like, if they would give me what I deserve, then I wouldn't have to behave in this way. I'm taking advantage of this situation. Let's take a moment and ask ourselves how many people we know who talk like that and who think like that, right? We should be careful of surrounding ourselves with people who justify their behaviors because of how little they have. Jesse, you got an insight there? Uh-huh.
And you're describing the scene around this sort of messiness, and that this is just allowed to exist in this world. And to me, that speaks to like a reluctant acceptance around, yes, we need and want all of this control, and we are going to exert as much control as possible, especially in regards to like neighbor against neighbor, friend against friend, family member against family member. And yet we recognize that there is so much to control that we have this like almost a need for these little pockets of chaos.
Mm.
And maybe like later that we'll bring up that, okay, these pockets of chaos can be used as, this is the example for, what not to do. Like if you go too far, if you stray too far from our curated world, then here, this is where you have to go. But just to me, that was a really poignant moment, is pointing out and this acceptance, maybe, or just leaving of all of that chaos that is there.
I totally agree. The party doesn't necessarily want to crush the human spirit because the human spirit is powerful and the party can use that power. They just want to channel it, they want to domesticate. So it's like, it would be far better, instead of crushing the intelligence of the proles and crushing the powers and the natural instincts of the proles, let's just channel that and make sure that it's contained so that when it comes time to utilize those very important powers, the party has the dominance and the wherewithal to make that happen. I completely agree. Um, so after that, right? Says the other, that's just it. That's just where it is. The strident voices stopped abruptly. The woman studied him. The women studied him in hostile silence as he went past. But it was not hostility exactly, merely a kind of wariness, a momentary stiffening, as at the passing of some unfamiliar animal. The blue overalls of the party could not be a common sight in a street like this. Indeed, it was unwise to be seen in such places, unless you had definite business there. The patrols might stop you if you happened to run into them. May I see your papers, comrade? What are you doing here? What time did you leave work? Is this your usual way home? And so on, and so forth. Not that there was any rule against walking home by an unusual route, but it was enough to draw attention to you if the thought police heard about it. You guys remember the newspeak word own life? Anything that you seem to be doing which is out of step with your party loyalty immediately seems suspect. Taking a longer way home means your thoughts weren't about what was best for the party, right? It's kind of spooky. I remember Neil deGrasse Tyson, the astrophysicist. He was asked, why aren't you he talked about being pressured by certain people in his community, in the black community, saying, why are you so focused on the stars? Why are you so focused on space? Right? You should be dealing with, trying to improve the conditions of the black community. He was told that by certain people because he was so interested in space. And it's interesting now that because he placed his interest where it belonged, because he was just, you can't control what you're interested in. He loved the stars. He loved the night sky. And he became an astrophysicist. And now I think he's done far more as a result of chasing his own interests than he would have had he submitted to the channeling of his interest into a particular area. I hope that makes sense. Um, Suddenly, the whole street was in commotion. There were yells of warning from all sides. And this one, I want you guys to really lean in, because this is one of my favorite parts of the book. Suddenly, the whole street was in commotion. There were yells of warning from all sides. People were shooting into the doorways like rabbits. A young woman leapt out of a doorway a little ahead of Winston, grabbed up a tiny child playing in a puddle, whipped her apron around it, and leapt back again, all in one movement. At the same instant, a man in a concertina-like black suit, who had emerged from a side alley, ran toward Winston, pointing excitedly to the sky. "Steamer," he yelled. "Look out, governor. Bang overhead. Lay down quick." Steamer was a nickname which for some reason the proles applied to rocket bombs. Winston promptly flung himself on his face. The proles were nearly always right when they gave you a warning of this kind. They seemed to possess some kind of instinct, which told them several seconds in advance when a rocket was coming. Although the rocket supposedly traveled faster than sound. Think about this. The proles are so sensitive to danger that their intuition actually saves Winston's life. Remember, Winston's a party member. He knows nothing that isn't approved by the party. So I was researching this, and George Orwell lived through the Blitzkrieg, right? And civilians at that time became experts in recognizing the sounds of war. People could often tell the difference between German bombers from British planes based on the pitch and rhythm of their engines, right? So whether a bomb was falling toward them or passing over, from the change in sound and frequency, like the Doppler effect and everything, just because they were living real lives, like when they were in danger, your heightens just kind of, your senses just kind of, you get a lot more sensitive. And the insight there to me was, if you allow anyone to hijack your intuition, to trigger your fear, your outrage, or your tribal reflexes at will, as the algorithm attempts to do, as political parties attempt to do. They want to hijack your moral intuition so that you're afraid when they say you're afraid, or you're outraged when they say you're outraged. Some people just come out and say it, and I hate that. Like, you should be outraged. Right? Do you hear this sometimes from, like, political commentators, and like, you should be so offended. The moment your emotions become programmable, your perception of truth becomes someone else's weapon, right? And this isn't a call to like a numb neutrality in the face of injustice, right? It's a call to discernment. You should feel deeply, but let conscience, not party allegiance, steer the wheel, right? And it's so interesting. Like, Winston would have died out there. He had no idea that a bomb was coming, but they are so connected, the proles, to their intuition, that they were able to warn him and get themselves out of the way. I think that's fascinating. Don't let anyone have control over when you're triggered and when you're upset and when you're joyful, right? Really,
Yeah,
really
that,
important. Yeah, go ahead.
excuse me.
For sure.
That was a really important, and I'm glad you said so about this hyper distraction. Like, when I am so consumed by what everything around me, and I'm so focused on what I'm supposed to be doing, what is right and what is wrong, I'm not paying attention to anything other than how each moment could be perceived. I'm so hyper focused on my, am I doing the right thing in accordance with, and you're right, it's so fear based, and it's so like, I could trick myself into saying, "Oh, I'm paying attention to the world around me," but in reality, what I'm paying attention to in those moments are how the world is perceiving me. It's so internally self-focused, whereas the proletariats are so alive, like you were saying. They're so present with who they are in the moment, that they're able to turn and reflect because they're not worried about how am I being seen. They get to actually see the world around them. That was, oh, I really like this moment too.
Yeah. And for me, it's almost like when I think of the proles, I think of like, not to be offensive, but like a circus elephant, like something that doesn't know its own strength. The strength is there, but it's just been so contained, and we're gonna see what that means, because this entire book is a warning from Orwell. Like, don't end up in a situation where there's higher ups that have access to knowledge with no passion, and then the lower that have access to passion with no knowledge. Like, let's facilitate an environment where we can have both, where we can be properly informed and properly motivated. And this problem goes all the way back to Socrates, when he found the natural philosophers who were discovering truths about nature. And he's like, how now shall we live? It's like, you guys have access to truth, but no relevance, right? What's the relevance of all these little factoids you're figuring out about nature? And then, he goes to the sophists, and he realized the sophists have the opposite problem. They have passion, but no truth. The sophists were just kind of, politicians for hire. They'll say whatever and just add a passionate voice. That's kind of where we get, all of the slogans and the platitudes that politicians still use. We want to have a wisdom that gives us access to both the truth and the relevance, so that we're not in the position of the proles or the party members. Um, so, okay. When he stood up, he found. No, let's go back here. The proles were nearly always right when they gave you warnings of this kind. They seemed to possess some kind of instinct, which told them several seconds in advance when a rocket was coming. Although the rocket supposedly traveled faster than sound, Winston clasped his forearms about his head. There was a roar that seemed to make the pavement heave. A shower of light objects pattered onto his back. When he stood up, he found that he was covered with fragments of glass from the nearest window. He walked on. The bomb had demolished a group of houses 200 meters up the street. A black plume of smoke hung in the sky, and below it a cloud of plaster dust, in which a crowd was already forming round the ruins. There was a little pile of plaster lying on the pavement ahead of him, and in the middle of it, he could see a bright red streak. When he got up to it, he saw that it was a human hand, severed at the wrist. Apart from the bloody stump, the hand was so completely whitened as to resemble a plaster cast. He kicked the thing into the gutter, and then, to avoid the crowd, turned down a side street to the right. Within 3 or 4 minutes, he was out of the area which the bomb had affected, and the sordid swarming life of the streets was going on as though nothing had happened. Guys, do you guys find it strange? Like, Orwell constantly makes mention of lower animals when describing the proles. Like, he referred to the freedom they have as that of free-range livestock. He's called their dwelling places rat holes. And now he's using the term swarming, which gives us an image of something kind of like insects. I think this is on purpose, and it's not to cause us to feel disdain towards them. A lot of what we understand about neurophysiology actually comes from studying flatworms. We have a shockingly similar survival circuitry, and it tells us a lot about human beings about how we behave under threat. So flatworms operate under raw stimulus, survival reflexes, minimal cognition, fast relevance realization, right? And this is how we collectively behave when we feel like we're under threat. Our behaviors become more predictable and more controllable. That's why the algorithm is such a sophisticated control tool. Because if I can show you something that triggers you, your brain will automatically go into flatworm survival mode. And then your behavior becomes systematic and predictable and ultimately controllable, right? And so I don't think that all of these references to animals is to be offensive or to make us feel like a sense of disdain toward the proles, but it's just like they're being studied and kind of kenneled in a way. Does that make sense? The sordid, swarming life of the streets was going on as though nothing had happened. It was nearly 20 hours, and the drinking shops which the proles frequented, pubs they called them, were choked with customers, from their grimy swing doors endlessly opening and shutting. There came forth the smell of urine, sawdust, and sour beer. In an angle formed by a projecting house front, 3 men were standing very close together, the middle one of them holding a folded-up newspaper, which the other 2 were studying over his shoulders. Even before he was near enough to make out the expression on their faces, Winston could see absorption in every line of their bodies. It was obviously some serious piece of news that they were reading. He was a few paces away from them when suddenly the group broke up and 2 of the men were in violent altercation. For a moment they seemed almost on the point of blows. "Can't you bleedin' well listen to what I say? I tell you no number ending in 7 ain't won for over 14 months. Yes, it has then. No, it has not. Back home I got the whole lot of them for over 2 years wrote down on a piece of paper. It takes 'em down regular as the clock. And I tell you no number ending in 7. Yes, a 7 has one. I could pretty near tell you the bleeding number. 407 it ended in. It were in February, 2nd week in February. February, your grandmother. I got it all down in black and white. And I tell you no number. Oh, pack it in, said the 3rd man. They were talking about the lottery. Winston looked back when he had gone 30 meters. They were still arguing with vivid, passionate faces. The lottery, with its weekly payout of enormous prizes, was the one public event to which the proles paid serious attention. So the lottery here is tragic for a couple of reasons. And look, if you gamble, I'm not mad at you. If you have fun, go have fun responsibly. Like I've gambled before. And probably the only reason I don't is because of my wife. Having a wife, for me at least, makes me a whole lot smarter. I'm so much more capable as a result of that woman in my life. You guys have no idea. But the question goes back to a Rupert Spira quote that I always use on my channel. In what can one reliably invest one's desire for fulfillment? In what can one reliably invest one's desire for fulfillment? The proles have invested their desire for fulfillment in something which is almost certain to fail and which is absolutely outside of their control. I have this conversation with my dad. It's like he's so invested sometimes in like political matters. I have to remind him, like, how much control do you have over what your favorite candidate is able to do? How much control do you have over these things? So why do you invest so much of your desire for fulfillment in something which you can't control at all? What that means is that your peace of mind fluctuates with the circumstance. Why, right? You should invest in things which you know are not going to change. Invest your desire for fulfillment in something stable, right? And it's a great time to invest in people, right? Regardless of their, political persuasion and all. It's like, use discernment, obviously. But what Orwell is trying to say here is, it seems to me, is be very wary when you're surrounded by people who have invested their desire for fulfillment in transient things, because that means that their emotional regulation is dependent on something which is almost sure to fail. And we all know these people. People who spend tons of money on, lotto or scratch tickets. I used to work at 7-Eleven, and people would bring in like hundreds of dollars worth of scratch tickets, and you're going to win. You're going to win like $80. If you bring in like hundreds of dollars worth of scratch, you're going to win like $80 back. And then they just give all that $80 back to me for like more scratch tickets. It is what it is. Um, the lottery, with its weekly payout of enormous prizes, was the one public event to which the proles paid any serious attention. It was probable that there were some millions of proles for whom the lottery was the principal, if not the only reason for remaining alive. It was their delight, their folly, their anodyne, their intellectual stimulant. Where the lottery was concerned, even people who could barely read and write seemed capable of intricate calculations and staggering feats of memory. Hold on, family. I want to open up so I can see the. There we go. Beautiful. Gigi says you can invest in other things and at the same time trying to be a little voice for political system. Kat says my sister won 80 grand in the California lottery, but she's the only one I know to ever get anything. That's a pretty substantial win. You know, they say that lottery winners are 3 times more likely to go bankrupt than the general population. You know, because when you win the lottery, it's not as if your ability to handle finances gets better. If anything, the problem becomes worse with the influx of money as well. There's also a weird thing about a tendency of lottery winners to become estranged from their loved ones. It's like you win $1 million and suddenly within a couple of months you find yourself in a different state, surrounded by people who like aren't your friends and family, just like kind of handlers and business people who've come to your aid. And you know, it's very, very strange things. I want to read some of these in the chat. The more lies society rests on, the more it will say that truth speakers lie. Ooh wee. Absolutely facts. It's basically what Orwell says in this book. Absolutely. Completely agree. Bay says, I've always told myself I won't win because I'm not responsible enough to handle it. Keeps me from gambling. Yeah, before I met my wife, I would go to Cripple Creek in Colorado. And I would go with my friends, and we would all leave our cards. We would leave our credit cards in the glove compartment, and we would take out cash, and then we would go back to the car, put our credit cards in the glove compartment, so that when we lose our money, which we thought to be like inevitable, we couldn't just go to the ATM inside the casino and just keep pulling out money. We had to actually go out into the parking lot, go to our car, by which time our senses had returned, and we're like, okay, we might as well just drive home. That was our method of actually not getting sucked up in the casino lifestyle. But listen, if it weren't for my wife, I would still gamble. I've never had a gambling problem, I don't think. But yeah, it's so serious. Gigi says, here in Italy, the money people spend on lottery and other gambling are always increasing over the years. Sadly, many go broke for that. Yeah. Jesse, what's up?
I'm thinking about, like, yes, we have this gambling, and that's one focus of where um where their attention is. But to me, the insight that I'm getting out of this is that my attention is not is it's more about this hope. It's more about hope and looking and seeking things that are inevitably going to, like, I'm wrapping all of my attention and all of my energy around something that is intangible, or that it's gonna fall through. Like, it's sort of this setting my self-sabotaging sort of space.
Yeah.
Like, I need to reach for something, because I have to hold on to hope of something, but I'm reaching for things that are inevitably going to set me up for failure. And that, that can be gambling, that can be a person, that can be, there's so many different ways that I can take that. So I, again, really appreciate these different perspectives, and how, okay, well, where am I taking this? What is gambling to me? What am I what am I putting all of my attention on? And that quote that you keep going back to is one that is really, really important to me too.
Yeah, you know, guys, Jesse is one of the leaders at the local wisdom school here. And in epic Jesse like fashion, you've predicted the next insight that we're going like right into. So check this out. Uh, it says the lottery, with its weekly payout of enormous prizes, was the one public event to which the proles paid serious attention. It was probable that there were some millions of proles for whom the lottery was the principal, if not the only reason for remaining alive. It was their delight, their folly, their anodyne, their intellectual stimulant. Where the lottery was concerned, even people who could barely read and write seemed capable of intricate calculations and staggering feats of memory. There was a whole tribe of men who made a living simply by selling systems, forecasts, and lucky amulets. Winston had nothing to do with the running of the lottery, which was managed by the Ministry of Plenty, but he was aware, indeed everyone in the party was aware, that the prizes were largely imaginary. Only small sums were actually paid out, the winners of the big prizes being non-existent persons in the absence of any real intercommunication between one part of Oceania and another. This was not difficult to manage. So there were no actual winners of the lottery. So this to me is a lot deeper than it looks. What Orwell is saying on the surface is that the party is essentially cheating. They don't make good on the payouts, or the people who win are people that the party just made up. The people who win the big ones, the party just makes them up, easy enough to manage that. But there's a deeper way of looking at this too. How often does the lottery actually deliver on what it seems to promise? Right? How often does the fantasy of winning the lotto actually match the real lives of the lottery winners? So I mentioned it before. I think it was according to a University of Kentucky study. Lottery winners are more likely to declare bankruptcy within 3 years than the average citizen. So the sudden wealth magnifies the existing financial weakness. It doesn't erase it, right? And I think it was a study in the UK that found that big winnings often destroy relationships. You become suddenly estranged from people who you care about. So the insight to think about is, what does the payout look like for those who invest in what you're investing in? Like, if we stop and pause and think about that, we're all deeply invested in something. We're like, yeah, I see this in my future, and I'm putting a lot of attention into this thing. It's a wise thing to look at and say, you know what? What is that actually paying out to the people who have won in my fantasy, for the people who have actually gotten the thing that I'm striving for? What does the actual payout look like for those who've gotten it, right? You might be surprised, right? And a lot of people who play the lotto, they don't study the lives of the lottery winners. They're not a whole heck of a lot better. A lot of them do a lot worse, right? And the idea is that, it won't be me. I'll be the outlier. But in the absence of any real intercommunication between one part of Oceania and another, this was not difficult to manage or to arrange. But if there was hope, it lay in the proles. You had to cling on to that. When you put it in words, it sounded reasonable. It was only when you looked at the human beings passing you on the pavement that it became an act of faith. The street into which he had turned ran downhill. He had a feeling that he had been in this neighborhood before, and that there was a main thoroughfare not far away. From somewhere ahead, there came a din of shouting voices. The street took a sharp turn and then ended in a flight of steps which led down into a sunken alley where the few stall keepers were selling tired-looking vegetables. At this moment, Winston remembered where he was. The alley led out into the main street. And down the next turning, not 5 minutes away, was the junk shop where he had bought the blank book, which was now his diary. And in a small stationer's shop, not far away, he had bought his pen holder and his bottle of ink. He paused for a moment at the top of the steps. On the opposite side of the alley, there was a dingy little pub whose windows appeared to be frosted over, but in reality were merely coated with dust. A very old man, bent but active, with white mustaches that bristled forward like those of a prawn, pushed open the swing door and went in. As Winston stood watching, It occurred to him that the old man, who must be 80 at least, had already been middle-aged when the revolution happened. He and a few others like him were the last links that now existed with the vanished world of capitalism. In the party itself, there were not many people left whose ideas had been formed before the revolution. The older generation had most been wiped out in the great purges of the 50s and 60s, and the few who survived had long ago been rifled into complete intellectual surrender, terrified into complete intellectual surrender. If there was anyone alive who could give you a truthful account of conditions in the early part of this century, it could only be a prole. Suddenly, the passage from the history book that he had copied into his diary came back into Winston's mind, and a lunatic impulse took hold of him. He would go into the pub. He would scrape acquaintance with that old man and question him. He would say to him, "Tell me about your life when you were a boy. What was it like in those days? Were things better than they are now, or were they worse?" So Winston's plan is to seek the counsel of the elderly in order to confirm his suspicion about his intuition that the party is lying and has corrupt ultimate aims. And it's not a bad idea because the problem is ill-defined. I always kind of mention the work of Dr. John Vervaeke on this channel, my YouTube channel. He was one of the things that inspired my YouTube channel and Wisdom School. I just loved his Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, the 50-part lecture series that he has on YouTube. And he makes mention of a study that found that when it comes to solving problems that are well-defined, young people perform better than elderly people. But when the problem is not well-defined, older people outperform younger people. It's called fluid intelligence versus crystallized intelligence. Young people are better at tasks like solving math equations or assembling furniture from a list of instructions. But old people are better at complicated problems like repairing relationships or designing a career path. So where the problem is not well defined. So, one of the insights there is that if you're young and you don't have a lot of old people in your life, that's something it would be wise to work on. And if you're older and you don't have young people in your life, it would also benefit you to change that. I was raised around a lot of older people. Like, I had 2 or 3 friends my age, but a lot of them were older people. Mrs. Polisek, when I was in elementary school, she was a librarian. She completely changed my life. But if you're a youth, find older friends. And if you're older, have youthful friends, people who and because we benefit each other in ways that we don't always realize.
So I have a dear friend that she has a practice and a habit for every generation, or for every 10 years. So from 0 to 10, she has a person or multiple people in her life that she looks up to. This is my role model for this age group, 0 to 10. And I'm going to have at least one role model that I can point to and say, this person is showing up in ways that I absolutely admire. Then from 10 to 20, from 20 to 30, 30 to 40, and so on through the ages. That way, and I love that. She told me about this and I went, and so you're reminding me now, oh yeah, I want to find people in my life from every one of these age groups so that I can draw on their insights and their wisdom, because you're absolutely right that there is so much experience and ability to synthesize material as we get older. And then as we're younger, there's an incredible ability to say, okay, A to B to C, I know exactly all of these steps to take. And being able to see that in real time and have those examples that's how I get to keep learning and growing.
Yeah, for sure. And I remember like having relationship issues with my wife when we were dating. and asking friends who were my age, and they would just be on my side. They would never criticize me. They'll be like, oh yeah, she just doesn't understand. She's, this and this and that. Bro, don't worry about it. You'll have to, and they would just blame her and give me this kind of comfortable echo chamber. It was when I went to people who were older than me, a generation or two generations older than me. Bro, they will tell you to, like, hey, you gotta kind of do this, and you gotta be a man of your word. And what did you like? They're just far better at navigating complicated problems, right? So yeah, I mean, for what it is worth, hurriedly, lest he should have time to become frightened. I'm not gonna go into that, but that line is powerful to me. I'm just going to leave that there. I don't know what to say about that, but for some reason that little phrase is a phrase that I highlighted. Hurriedly, lest he should have time to become afraid. There are certain things that if you wait, the waiting in and of itself will just kind of put you in this mode of, well, I'll just do it tomorrow, or I'll just kind of, I didn't write anything like, to pause necessarily as an insight on that point, but something about that just seems magical to me. Hurriedly, lest he should have time to become frightened. He descended the steps and crossed the narrow street. It was madness, of course. As usual, there was no definite rule against talking to proles and frequenting their pubs, but it was far too unusual an action to pass unnoticed. If the patrols appeared, he might plead an attack of faintness. But it was not likely that they would believe him. He pushed open the door, and a hideous, cheesy smell of sour beer hit him in the face. As he entered, the din of voices dropped to about half its volume. Behind his back, he could feel everyone eyeing his blue overalls. A game of darts, which was going on at the other end of the room, interrupted itself for perhaps as much as 30 seconds. The old man whom he had followed was standing at the bar, having some kind of altercation with the barman, a large, stout, hook-nosed young man with enormous forearms. A knot of others, standing round with glasses in their hands, were watching the scene. "I asked you civil enough, didn't I?" said the old man, straightening his shoulders pugnaciously. "You telling me you ain't got a pint mug in the old bleeding boozer?" "And what in hell's name is a pint?" said the barman, leaning forward with the tips of his fingers on the counter. "Hark at him. Calls himself a barman and doesn't know what a pint is. Why, a pint's the half of a quart, and there's 4 quarts to the gallon. I have to teach you the ABCs next." "Never heard of 'em," said the barman shortly. Liter and half a liter, that's all we serve. There's the glasses on the shelf in front of you." I had that down kind of as the final insight there. And maybe the reason that kind of argument between this old man and the bartender, the old man arguing with the bartender has a crazy relevance because he has enough understanding to teach a bartender how to do his job. Never mind how trivial it might be to you to know how many pints to a quart or how many quarts to a gallon. His mind isn't asleep. It's just domesticated, right? That's what Orwell is trying to get through. It's like these systems don't have to take away your intelligence. That would be far too difficult a job to just make all of the human beings in 2025 dumber, right? It's just, I want to channel your intelligence to things which don't matter. I want to make it so that you're used to having a kind of intelligence that's tethered to things which don't make you wiser, right? This is kind of one of Orwell's great warnings. A society doesn't need to make people ignorant. It only needs to give them intelligent distractions. I know people who are who have an obsessive mastery of video games, right? Or video game economics. You can spend cognitive horsepower on fictional marketplaces so much that you ignore the real ones, right? You become kind of brilliant in worlds that don't ask anything of you spiritually or morally. And to go back to John Vervaeke, when he's saying, one of the reasons that video games are like a bona fide addiction is because they kind of subtly give you access to things that real life should, like a narrative order, a nomological order, access to the flow state, a normative order, right and wrong. But there's just no consequences. You can just do it from, the comfort of your couch. You get the feeling of competence without any real world mastery. And the consequences is that there's a generation of people who feel smart but can't actually navigate adulthood, right? Responsibility or meaning. So this 80-year-old sitting at this bar represents intelligence wasted, not a lack of intelligence. A lack of intelligence would be a little bit more forgivable and a little bit less frightening. The real scary thing is just like, wow, this is an elephant. This is this is a powerful being who just doesn't know that it's powerful. Another example is people who are like hyper specialized in like celebrity culture, people who can recite all of the Kardashians' boyfriends, but they can't navigate relationships in their own life, right? It's like, wow, you have all of this power to memorize all and to know what's going on in the Kardashians' lives, but you can't shape your own. And it's like, there's nothing bad about, it's so difficult to not fall in the opposite ditch. There's nothing bad about watching the Kardashians, watching the NFL, knowing NFL stats, drama, and all that stuff. But it's possible that it can create the illusion of knowledge while offering zero wisdom. That's it. It occupies emotional and intellectual attention, the most precious resource that we have. And one of the consequences is a society of mentally busy people who are spiritually empty, easy to entertain, easy to distract, easy to manipulate, right? So the next time that we sit down together, it's a really, really good time to be here next Monday, because we'll kind of be unpacking the conversation. We'll be going into the conversation that Winston has with this old man, right? Because he clearly has intelligence, but is intelligence enough? Anybody at this time is free to join the stage. Jesse, you have any final thoughts?
So many thoughts and so many questions to just sit with.
Yeah, right?
I really, really love this. Is intelligence enough? And like instantly my heart is saying, no, of course it's not. We have to have a balance. But it looks like Liv has something to add as well. Go ahead.
Liv, how's it going?
Thank you. Oh, good. Thank you. Good. Well, intelligence is so many things that question is just almost impossible to answer.
That's fair.
There are so many types of intelligence that I find it really, really hard to narrow that down.
I think that's really wisely put. We were talking about the fluid intelligence that the youth has versus the crystallized intelligence that is mainly found in elderly people. There's propositional knowledge, which gives you access to facts. And then there's procedural knowledge that gives you access to skills. And then there's perspectival knowledge, when you can switch perspectives and kind of see the world through Winston's perspective. So reading fiction, especially something like 1984, increases our perspectival knowledge. We can look at the world through a different perspective, and that gives us tools. So yeah, there's tons of different kinds of intelligence. So I like that caveat for sure.
Mm. Yeah, and it's one of the things that makes it really, really hard to look at yourself as an intelligent person, because it depends on who's deciding what kind of intelligence is intelligence, if I'm making any sort of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I
Sorry.
think that was really, really important, Liv, that um, who is the one? That is a question that I'm gonna sit with. Who is the one that's judging intelligence?
Exactly.
Where am I? How am I judging or examining my own sense of intelligence? Am I looking at the artistic and the creative intelligence, or is I'm hoping I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Shanti says the emotional intelligence, and my brain was
Hmm.
going, well, relational intelligence, and
Hmm.
um, yeah, oh, there's a lot, and the spatial awareness, and there's
Hmm.
so many different types, and probably more than we could even categorize.
Yeah, I've heard it said that there's like some kind of kinesthetic intelligence that like ballerinas have. Uh, like a bodily kind of intelligence of like knowing, how to mold your body to the circumstance and knowing where to. So yeah, there's lots and lots of different intelligences. But I really think, to that question, Jess, of who chooses, who chooses what's intelligent. And I really think, I think it's the world, because especially with perspectival knowledge, which isn't just seeing the world through a particular perspective, but knowing which tool to use and when. There are, like, I'm someone who knows how to debate, right? And that can be a blessing and a curse for those of you guys who know somebody who kind of likes to debate, right? Um, but perspectival knowledge is knowledge of when should I debate this person and when should I recognize that this person just might need a helping hand, or like when I'm having an argument with my wife, should I continue debating or does she just kind of need a hug, right? Knowing which tool to use, because if you only have one tool in your arsenal, you'll think that you need to use that in every moment and you can get yourself into a lot of problems. So it seems to me that a lot of times the universe is the thing that chooses, right? What type of intelligence meets the moment. Um, and it can be pretty unforgiving. But I mean, that's just my 2 cents.
So then I would ask you, what is the difference between the universe making that decision and, as you were talking about earlier, society around me or the people around me? Um, so my instant thought, excuse me while I answer my own, would be like how those around me show up in response to whatever it is that I do. Is that, am I understanding you accurately, or are you going in a different direction?
No, I think that that's partially it. But I mean, what I meant about the universe is like natural selection, right? There are, like, nature will just completely cut off those who have made the wrong decision, were in the wrong place at the wrong time. Like Winston in the book almost died by a rocket that could have been avoided, right? And he needed people who were in touch with something that he wasn't in touch with to do him the favor of, like, jolting him away from that danger, right? And so the type of knowledge that Winston has, which, at first glance, it seems like, well, Winston is far more knowledgeable than the proles. I mean, he has knowledge about what Big Brother's doing. He works at one of the ministries where he kind of decides what the past is and what the future is. And so we are assuming that he's all knowledgeable and that the proles aren't, and they're just living their busy, rat, roach lives or whatever. But they have a type of knowledge which was more pertinent in that instance, right? And so it's like the universe decides, right? Which is maybe the reason that we're in so much danger when we have a deficit in either direction, either the relevance or the truth. Sorry, I bloviated a little bit there. I talked a little too much. I get excited over this stuff.
Oh, really? That's not you.
Phantom says, hot take:
So
intelligence of any kind is determined by fitness to the universe. And he puts that as a question. Phantom, come up if you want to explain that. Guys, I have a deep appreciation for Phantom. It wouldn't, this Discord and this stage and all this stuff, like, he's helped me with my mic and my, like, everything. Like, this whole thing wouldn't exist without Phantom. So I appreciate you, brother. Go ahead.
Well, you're making me blush already. Um, no, I was just saying, like, what if, because Jesse was saying who's the judge, or actually Liv was also, but asking about who judges our intelligence, and I would say I don't know if anyone or society is so much the judge as is our ability to be well adapted to our environment, kind of thing. Like, and so that was my hot take. Hot take. A question would be: is intelligence of any kind determined by our fitness to our universe, to what comes at us and how we deal with it? You know, if we're in complex relationships, then are we highly if we successfully navigate complex relationships, are we emotionally intelligent, or endowed with fluid intelligence? If we are, I mentioned Jackie Chan as an embodied, the embodiment of kinesthetic intelligence. Uh, that obviously it's a movie and stuff like that, but most of his stunts are done real time and live. Um, and thankfully, he's very rarely broken a limb, or if he has, it's he's probably broken every bone in his body, but in doing so has developed a high sense of kinesthetic intelligence and spatial awareness, and is extremely well adapted to his physical environment. So
Yeah,
could it be, like it's like that survivability kind of thing? That was just what I was thinking.
sure, sure. Yeah, Jackie Chan's an excellent example. Like I remember Jackie Chan like trying to jump through a chair. Yeah, I think it was on one of the what were those movies he did with Chris Tucker? Rush Hour, one of the Rush Hour movies
Rush Hour.
where he like he just jumps through this chair and like the chair has like a gap in the back of it and he like got stuck a couple of times in the deleted scenes. But yeah, great for that kind of intelligence for sure.
this your question, Phantom, makes me wonder if if a person with a very specific area of intelligence